Mr. Shem was starting Masechta Eruvin, Parag Vav, which discusses the Sugi Ruvei Chatzeros. Before we start, just want to give a quick akdama to what a Ruvei Chatzeros is, what we're going to be discussing in the Mishnayos here. So we learned in the first two program of this Masechta that proper mechitas must be makif an area, must enclose an area before carrying in it is allowed. The next four program relate to the Isad Rabbanon of carrying between houses, Chatzeros and Mavois, even when they're properly enclosed into the takanas and the ways to be misakin, the such carrying with the Ruvei Chatzeros or Shtufim Avois. So what is a Ruvei Chatzeros? Again, Shlomo HaMelech and Chacham of his door assered carrying between an individual's house and a chutzner shared by other houses, even though the chutzner is enclosed on all sides and is a full-fledged Rishus HaYochid. The reason for this is as follows. A house is a private place of one person, while the chutzner is under the joint ownership and use of all the residents of a chutzner, which makes it look like a Rishus HaRabim. Since carrying between a home and a chutzner could be confused with carrying between a Rishus HaYochid and Rishus HaRabim, the Chachamim assered it. The Chacham provided a way to remove this isser. This is known as a Ruvei Chatzeros, and the residents of the chutzner join in an eruv. We view them as a single group that own all of the houses and of the chutzner together. The eruv is made up by collecting a loaf of bread before Shabbos from each of the dwellings, which opens into that chutzner, and placing the loaves on one of those houses. This symbolizes that all the chutzner's residents reside in the house that contains the bread. The chutzner can then be viewed as serving only that one house rather than several houses, and is no longer resembles Rishus HaRabim. Besides that, we also have Shtufim Avoyos, the shituf of the different mavos that open into the Chatzeros. Just as it's also to carry from a house into a chutzner without a Ruvei Chatzeros, and similarly forbidden to carry from a chutzner into a mavo, into which two or more Chatzeros open. The reasoning for this is the same as before. The chutzner is a relatively private area serving a small number of households, while the alley is used by households with all the Chatzeros opening into it. Therefore, carrying between a chutzner and an alley also has the appearance of carrying between a Rishus HaYochid and a Rishus HaRabim. The Chacham thus assered carrying from any privately owned area to jointly owned area, whether from an individual's house to a courtyard, or from a courtyard owned by a limited group of individuals to an alley shared by others. Here too the Chacham provided a way to remove this isser. This is known as Shtufim Avois. The Shtufim Avois is formed by collecting food from all the residents in the mavoi and placing it in one of the Chatzeros in the mavoi. The Shtufim Avois joins all the Chatzeros of the alley together into one chutzner, the same way that Ruvei Chatzeros merges together all the homes in the courtyard together. Now, there's something called a bittul rishus, which is a big sugi here. If one of the residents of the chutzner forgot to join the Ruvei Chatzeros, he asks its use to all the other residences. Because there's still two distinct residences in the chutzner, the person who did not join and everyone else. So he wasn't me'arif together with them, so he has a separate rishus. Once Shabbos begins, it's too late for him to join the eruv. The only eitzah for him is to abandon his rights to the chutzner for that Shabbos. Once he abandons his rights, the chutzner is the only rishus, is the sole domain of the members of the eruv. This permits these residents to carry between their house and the chutzner. Now, there's something else that we're going to discuss here called schiras rishus. A guy who lives in a courtyard also restricted under certain circumstances. However, neither of the eitzes mentioned above can remove that restriction. The only way to remove the restriction caused by the presence of the guy is for one of the yidden to rent from him his rights to the chutzner, as we'll see in the Mishnah. So Mishnah Aleph, Hadorim Anachir B'Chutzner, somebody who lives with a guy in a chutzner, meaning their houses share the same courtyard. Oy Misha Einamoide Be'eruv, or with somebody who doesn't accept halachas of eruv, which is a kusi. The Kusim was a nation, we discussed this when we learned Parak Chelek, that they were a nation brought by King Shalmaneser to settle the area of Eretz Yisrael, left unpopulated after the exile, after the Golus of the Kingdom of the North. An outbreak of attacks by lions frightened them into being Megayer and serving Hashem. However, they didn't completely give up their Avodah Zarah and the practices. As a result, is Machlekes Tanam whether the Kusim are sincere Gerim and are halachically Yidden, or they're insincere Gerim and they're legally Goyim. All agree, however, that the Kusim do not accept the authority of the Rabbanon and therefore do not accept any Hilchas Eruv. Now, Kuli Alma Maidi, that after they found as is stated in the Gemara and stated in Masechta Kusim, after they discovered that they were all doing Avodah Zarah on Har Grizim, we explained why Dafka they were excited about Har Grizim to do Avodah Zarah over there. then everyone was masking that the kusim are not geri emes because they're still doing away the zar. So I raise a oyster, that person prohibits the yid from carrying items between his house and the chatzar, and even an erev with that person doesn't help. The Chacham instituted this isser in order to discourage yidden from living in the courtyard together with the goy or a kusi. Strictly speaking, a goy should not restrict the yid's ability to carry in the chatzar because his dwelling is not considered a residence with regard to hilchos erev. Nevertheless, the Chacham wanted to discourage yidden from sharing chatzar with goyim to prevent them becoming influenced by their behavior. They therefore decreed that a yid may not carry on Shabbos between his house and a chatzar shared with the goy, even with the erev. However, they allowed a yid to carry if he symbolically rents the goy's rights to the chatzar. The goy will be reluctant to agree to this because he'll suspect the Jews of renting these rights, which, as far as he can see, gain the Jew nothing, to engage in some kind of sorcery. As a result, the Jew will not be able to carry on Shabbos and will be motivated to move out of the chatzar. The kusim are treated like goyim with regard to all the halachas we're going to talk about here, even according to the opinion that they are goyim, that they are geri emes, because they never accepted the halachas of erev. Additionally, the Rabbanu wanted to prevent yidden from being influenced by the kusim. So, hadara manachir b'chatzar ayamisha ena ma'id of erev harei za'oser olav. The person prohibits the yid from carrying between his house and the chatzar. Divrei Reb Meir, as Ezrak Reb Meir. Reb Lez ben Yaakov says, "La'olam ene oiser achi ushnei shreilim oiser zalzeh." The goy doesn't ask carrying in the chatzar unless there are at least two yidden living in the chatzar who ask each other when carrying without an erev. That is, unless there are two homes in the chatzar occupied by yidden, said even if there were no goyim living there, they would have to make an erev between them to be matik carrying. In such a case, a chacham or geyser that an erev joined together by both yidden will not permit carrying unless they rent the rights from the goy. However, when there's only a single yid living in the chatzar with the goy, the chacham didn't ask to carry him because it's unusual for a lone yid to share a chatzar together with the goy. Since the Jew in any case will probably not live alone with the goy, the chacham saw no need to discourage him further by asking carrying in the chatzar. Mishnah Beis. Reb Gamliel says, "Ma'asav tzeduki echad." There's a story with the tzeduki she'idar manu b'maveh b'Yerushalayim who shared an alley with us in Yerushalayim, and he abandoned his rights so we could carry in it. The previous Mishnah, we learned the halacha that when a goy shares a chatzar with a yid, he asks them to carry. The Mishnah now discusses the status of a tzeduki. The tzeduki was a sect of yidden in the time of the Second Beis HaMikdash who accepted Torah Sheb'Ksav but not Torah Sheb'al Peh or any dinim d'Rabbanan. The Gemara explains the opening statement of the Mishnah is missing. It should say tzeduki is like a goy and asks yidden for carrying in his chatzar or an alley. Reb Gamliel says a tzeduki is not like a goy. And the Mishnah now continues, meaning, even though the tzeduki do not accept hilchos erev, Reb Gamliel does not treat them like goyim with regard to hilchos erev. However, Reb Gamliel agrees with the previous Mishnah that kusam are like goyim because he says that they were never megar l'chatchila. They're not geri emes, they're geri rayas. Reb Gamliel, so again, Reb Gamliel says, "Ma'asav tzeduki echad." There's a story with the tzeduki she'idar manu b'maveh b'Yerushalayim, he shared an alley with us in Yerushalayim, and he abandoned his rights in it so we could carry in it. Our father told us from Gamliel of Yavna was the Nasi shortly after the Churban Beis HaMikdash. His father, Reb Shimon Gamliel, the first one, was the Nasi of the period right before the Churban. So our father told us, hurry and take out all the kelim to the mavoi, to take possession of the rights that he abandoned, actually before the tzeduki carries something out to the chatzar and takes back his rights and asks you from carrying there. We see from this Maisa that a tzeduki can be matek carrying in his chatzar by abandoning his rights to it, since only a yid can permit a chatzar by abandoning his rights to it, not a tzeduki. We see that Gamliel's father treated the tzeduki as a yid in regard to the erev. Rabbi Yehuda has a different version to the story. And he has a different version of what Rabbi Gamliel's father said. He said, hurry and carry out what you need to do in the mavoi before Shabbos begins, and the tzeduki asks you from carrying in the alley. According to this nusach, the Rabbi Yehuda is saying of the story, Rabbi Gamliel's father considers the tzeduki like a goy. Therefore, abandoning his rights would have accomplished nothing, and he would prohibit them. He would ask them from carrying in the mavoi as soon as Shabbos began. That's why Rabbi Gamliel's father advised them to carry out what they needed to do before Shabbos. Okay. Mishnah Gimel. Anshe chatzar sheshochach echem hem le'erev. Where members of a chatzar formed an erev, and one of them forgot to join the erev. So in order to be matter everyone to carry there, he abandoned his rights in the chatzar. So basically, osam lahachazim lahotu lo'ev lohem. it's also for him and for the other residents to carry between the chutzner and his house, because his house and the chutzner are now two separate reshuyos. However, it's mutter for him and the other residents to carry between their houses and the chutzner, just not from his own chutzner. Since he abandoned the chutzner to the members of the Eruv, their houses and the chutzner are considered the same reshus. Even the resident who got to join the Eruv is mutter to carry because he's now considered like a guest of the other residents, and a guest is allowed to carry throughout the property of his host. Since he may be considered a guest, his carrying out to the chutzner from his house is not considered reclaiming the rights he abandoned, but he's just like a guest. Nasan le'rishusan, if the other residents abandoned their rights in the chutzner to the one who forgot to join the Eruv, who mutter? He is mutter to carry between his house and the chutzner, because once they abandon their rights to him, the chutzner and his house are both considered his rishus. But they're also for carrying even between his house and the chutzner, because many people cannot be considered the guests of one person. If there are two residents who forgot to join the Eruv and the other residents abandoned their rights to them, they prohibit each other from carrying between their houses and the chutzner because they're not joined together in an Eruv. Even if one of them then went and abandoned his rights to the other, they're still also because these two never acquired the rights to the other residents of the chutzner. Thus, two people who forgot to join an Eruv always answer each other. Thus, the halacha is that one resident who forgot to join in the Eruv can be matir carrying, either through abandoning his rights to the residents who joined in the Eruv, or through receiving rights from them. But two residents who forgot to join in the Eruv can be matir carrying only through abandoning the rights to the residents who joined in the Eruv, but not through receiving rights from them. Very interesting. Mishnah Dalet. The Mishnah discusses the time when a resident may abandon his rights. When may one abandon his rights in the chutzner, being matir the other residents to carry? Beishamai say he must do so while it's still day on Friday before Shabbos begins. When Shabbos begins, it's also because it's a form of a kinyan, and it's also to do kinyanim on Shabbos. According to Beishamai, abandoning the chutzner is a transfer of rights from one who did not join the Eruv to the other residents. Therefore, it's similar to a business transaction. Since business is also on Shabbos, he must abandon his rights before Shabbos. Just go see how weit a din d'Rabbanan could go. Mamish v'kol dini d'oraisa, ashes this, ashes that, continues to asa this, continues to asa that. Beis Hillel say he may do so even after it gets dark and Shabbos has begun, because it's not considered a kinyan. Beis Hillel maintain that abandoning the rishos is merely giving up his rights. It's not transferring the rishos. Since abandoning does not require any transfer to the other residents, it's not similar to a business transaction and may be done even on Shabbos. We learned in the previous Mishnah that when one abandons his rights to a chutzner, things may not be carried from his house to the chutzner for the rest of that Shabbos. The Mishnah now discusses what happens if he's over and he violates this restriction. So if a person abandons his rights and afterwards carried out from his house to the chutzner, whether he did it b'dafka or not dafka, meaning whether he did it unintentionally or deliberately, he prohibits carrying for all the residents, because by carrying from his house to the chutzner, he has in effect reclaimed his rights. Although carrying unintentionally does not actually restore his rights, the Chacham still asked the residents from carrying in this case so that people won't be makel in cases where he carried out b'dafka. Remeir's machmer over here, as similar to what we saw in the first Mishnah. Rebuda says if he carried out b'dafka, he asks the chutzner, but if he carried out unintentionally, he doesn't ask for it. Yehuda is not concerned that this will lead people to being makel, even when he carries out b'dafka. Moreover, once the other residents in the chutzner have taken out items of their houses to the chutzner based on the being nice and rishos of the abandonment, they were kind of the abandoned rights, and the abandoner cannot reclaim his rights to asa carrying, as we learned in Mishnah Beis. Mishnah Hey. Balabayas or Shutaf Lashchen, if Shtufim Mavois is made with food owned jointly by all the residents of the Mavois. So Balabayas, Shahay Shutaf Lashchenov, if a homeowner shared an alley with two neighbors and owned food together with them for business purposes, the halacha is like this. If he owned wine together with one of the neighbors and also owned other wine together with the other neighbor, and they poured all the wine into one container, they don't need to contribute other food to make an eruv. Over here we're really talking about a shtufim avais, but we're using the term eruv. Instead, they can use the wine that they own together for the shituf. If, however, he owns wine together with one neighbor and oil together with the other neighbor, they must contribute to each other to make a shituf. They cannot use the wine and oil for the shituf, even if they pour them into one container Because wine and oil cannot mix together to form one liquid. The shituf joins the residents together in the ownership of one food. Since wine and oil cannot become one, they cannot be used together to form a shituf. Reb Shimon says no. In either case, they don't need to use other food to make an eruv. Even if he owned wine with one neighbor and oil with another, the food can be mixed as a shituf, because according to Reb Shimon, when wine and oil are mixed, it is considered one liquid. Mishnah Vav. Each separate household in a chatzah must contribute bread towards the eruv. The Mishnah discusses when multiple households in a single building are considered one household, so that one bread is good enough for them, for all the people in the building. When they're considered separate households, making it necessary for each person to contribute his own bread. Maybe a shayla from an apartment building, as we discussed in Lakdama. So 5 groups of people, they spend Shabbos in a large hall, separated from each other by low mechitzas. The mechitzas did not reach the ceiling. Each of these areas has its own door to the chatzar, and other houses share the courtyard as well. So the hall has to join in an area with the other houses. The question is whether the residents of the hall need to contribute 1 bread or 5 breads for each group. So Beishamai say a separate area of contribution must be made by each group because of the partitions separate them into independent households. Meaning, it's not even apartments. It's one apartment, so to speak, but they're walls that don't even go up to the ceiling. Even there, Beishamai says that every person needs to make his own eruv. They still say 1 eruv contribution suffices for all of them because they're considered one large household. Since the mechitzas do not reach the ceiling, it's not enough to separate the areas into independent households. However, they still agree that if some of them are living in separate rooms or upper stories of the building, each group must contribute separately to the eruv because they're independent households. Since they're completely separated, each group is considered its own household. This would also be true for the hall itself if we're separated into completely separate mechitzas that reach the ceiling. So then each area is considered its own household and must contribute separately to the eruv. Mishnah Zayin. People who sleep in separate homes with one chatzar but eat regularly in someone else's home, and that chatzar, for example, in their father's home, are all considered a part of the person's household and do not have to join on their own in the eruv. The Mishnah discusses halachas for people who merely take food from this person but eat it in their own homes, meaning that there's like a public kitchen and everybody goes to the kitchen to take the food, but they bring it back to their apartment to eat. So ach and ashutfin, brothers or partners working together for someone in the chatzar, who receive food at their father's or employer's table but eat it at their own homes, sleep in their own homes. Each of them needs to make an eruv contribution. Since they do not actually eat in that house, they're not considered members of the father's or employer's household, and therefore cannot be included in the contribution of their father or employer. Therefore, if one of them forgot and they're not joining the eruv, he must abandon his rights to the chatzar before the other people who live there may carry in it. What are we talking about? That's only when the residents of the chatzar bring their eruv to another place, they bring it to their home, and not to the father's house. Since in this case the father needs to join the eruv along with the other residents of the chatzar, the sons may also join him. But if the eruv comes to them, that if the eruv in the chatzar is placed in their father's house, or if there are no other residents with them in the chatzar besides for the father, and it's they do not need to join in the eruv. In the first case, the sons do not need to contribute to the eruv because their father doesn't need to contribute. In the second case, they do not need to contribute because in absence of other residents, they and their father are considered one household, and there's never a requirement for an eruv for one household. Mishnah Ches. Chamesh chatzeres psuchos lamovoy, or psuchos ulazu psuchos lamovoy. You have 5 chatzeres that open up into an alley. Eruv b'chatzeres. If each chatzar forms its own eruv, len shtatvu b'movoy, but they didn't join together to make a shituf for the movoy, mutar b'chatzeres asurim b'movoy. It's mutar to carry in the chatzeres, but it's aser to carry in the movoy because the eruvin permit carrying in the chatzar, but not in the movoy. If im shtatvu b'movoy, mutar b'kan v'kan. But if they join together in a shituf for the mavoy, it's mutar to carry in the chatzar, in any of the chatzeros, and in the mavoy, because they made both an eruv and a shituf. Eruv b'chatzeros v'nishtatvu b'mavoy. If each courtyard made its own eruv and they also joined together in a shituf for the alley, and one of the residents of the chatzar forgot to join in the chatzar's eruv, but he did participate in the shituf for the alley, so mutar kan v'kan. It's mutar to carry both here in the chatzar and there in the alley, because in such a case, a shituf it's going to be matir carrying in the chatzar even without an eruv for the chatzar specifically. However, if one of the members of the mover forgot didn't join the shituf but did join the eruv for the chatzar, they are permitted to carry in the courtyards but are prohibited to carry in the alley. Carrying in the chatzeros is mutter because the Eiruvin are valid. However, carrying in the alley is also because the shituf is invalid since it's missing a member, and an Eruv only works for the chatzar and does not work for the movish. Because an alley in relation to the chatzeros is like a chatzar in relation to the houses. Just like the chachamim asked carrying between houses and a chatzar without an Eruv, because they were concerned that people might mistakenly carry between a private rishus and a rishus rabim, so too they asked carrying between a chatzar and an alley without a shita for the same reason. Okay, Mishnah tests. Every resident in a chatzar must join the eruv, otherwise it's no good. The Mishnah discusses whether a person's right to walk through a chatzar is enough to make him considered a resident in a chatzar. So if there are two courtyards, one located inside the other, so that the resident of the inner courtyard must walk through the outer chatzar to reach the street, and the inner courtyard made its own eruv, but the outer chatzar did not make an eruv at all, carrying in the inner chatzar is mutter, because they have an eruv, but carrying in the outer chatzar is also because they did not have an eruv. Second case, if the outer chatzar made an eruv, but the inner one did not, carrying is also both of them. Since the residents of the inner chatzar have the right to walk through the outer chatzar, the outer one must include the residents of the inner one in their eruv. Since the residents of the inner chatzar did not join in it, the eruv of the outer one is no good. The third case is eruv azula atzma zula atzma muteres b'fnei atzma zum muteres b'fnei atzma. If this one made its own eruv and that one made its own eruv, but the two did not join together in a joint eruv, so this one is mutter to carry within its own chatzar, and that one is also mutter to walk within its own chatzar, because both eruvin are valid. In this case, the outer eruv is good because even though the residents of the inner chatzar do not join it, because this Tana holds that the residents who are permitted to carry in their own chatzar do not ask for another chatzar through which they have drisas regel, right of passage. Rabbi Kiva oiser hachitzoyna. Rabbi Kiva, however, asks carrying the outer chatzar shel drisas regel israsa, because the right of passage, the drisas regel, the residents of the inner chatzar, asks carrying in the outside chatzar. According to Rabbi Kiva, having a right of passage to the outer chatzar makes one like a full resident of it, and the outer eruv cannot be valid without these people joining in it. The Chachamim argue, and the Chachamim say, "Ein drisas regel israsa." The right of passage of an inner chatzar never asks us an outer chatzar, because right of passage does not make one a resident in the outer chatzar. Now, there's another nafkamina here, which we'll see in Mitzvah Masechet in the Dorim, that if somebody asks somebody else to walk in the chatzar, what's the halacha legabe drisas regel? Mishnah test. If one resident of the outer chatzar forgot and did not join the eruv of the chatzar, hapnimis muteres, carrying in the inner chatzar is mutter because that eruv is good. Asura, and carrying in the outer chatzar is also because residents who forgot to join invalidates the outer chatzar, the eruv. Hapnimis eruv shtein asuras. If a resident of the inner chatzar forgot and did not join the eruv of his chatzar, but all the outer residents joined in the outer eruv, shtein asuras, carrying in both chatzeros are also. The inner eruv is no good because of the resident who didn't join. The outer eruv is no good because the inner residents who have the right to walk through the outer chatzar did not join in the eruv. Now, nasnu eruvim b'makam echad. If they place the joint eruv in one place in the outer chatzar, and one resident of either the inner or the outer chatzar forgot and did not join in the eruvin, carrying above the chatzar is also because the eruv is invalid. Since the chatzar is joined in one eruv, it's invalidated if a resident from either one forgets to join. Since the eruv joins both chatzeros, it's valid only if all the residents from both chatzeros participate in the eruv. Therefore, if a resident from either chatzar forgot to join, the eruv doesn't work. If both courtyards were inhabited by lone individuals, that is, only one person lived in each chatzar, they do not need to join in an eruv together, and carrying on both the inner and the outer chatzeros are mutter. Since the inner resident is mutter to carry in the inner chatzar, even without an eruv, his right to walk through the outer chatzar does not answer carrying there. Ad kan Parag Vav.